The effect of personal surveillance technologies on family units. This presentation will examine the normalization of family monitor tracking apps and security cameras within the past 10 years, as well as how they've affected the quality of relationships within family units. Personal surveillance technologies, such as tracking apps and security cameras, are detrimental to family units because they disturb the power dynamics when privacy concerns are ignored and they're overused with or without consent, resulting in a lack of trust and respect within family units. Modern technology, and especially the Internet of Things, are often compared to panopticon prisons. In a panopticon prison, the security resides in the center of a cylinder made of prison cells. This way, guards can watch prisoners at any time without their knowledge. An easy and common example of this as it relates to the Internet of Things would be that an Alexa or Google Home device could be listening into a conversation without any of the participants knowing. This concept of panopticon-like spying is especially important when it comes to, whenever it comes to tracking devices, because the people who are watching or listening are friends and family, not strangers or computers. Along with that, as one of the stimuli sources, the tech that it will invade our lives in 2020 mentions, this is a technology that people have on them constantly, often even in the form of a wristwatch or a phone. Thus, there is no escaping the prison, and it can have very negative effects on those relationships and cause mistrust, especially when only one person has access to the tracking device, like what is often the case between tracking with kids and parents, creating an uncomfortable power dynamic that which is that of a security guard and a prisoner. Understandably, children and parents still view intrusive technologies completely differently. Children and teens are largely opposed to it as they're so frequently on the receiving end of the tracking. One teen cited in a peer-reviewed journal, Intruders versus Intrusiveness, that it seems like an invasion of privacy or a big brother kind of thing. This study in particular found that children were especially opposed to Entryway cameras in their homes as opposed to normal text logs. They agreed that they did not want their parents to know exactly who was over. As you can see, whenever there's a video log, you can see the person who lives at the house as well as whoever they're bringing. And they also didn't want them to see when they left and entered the house, which is, you can see in both cases, whether text log or video log. Parents, on the other hand, were more concerned about the safety than privacy. One parent stated in the same study that the technology was for safety purposes, as you can see who was in and out most of the time. However, what parents did not consider here is that teenagers in particular are likely to want to bypass this technology, either by leaving doors unlocked, windows ajar, or removing or disabling sensors and cameras. For tracking apps, consent is key. A child cannot truly consent to being tracked, which often feeds into the power dynamic, like in the security guard prisoner example. On the other hand, when they try to bypass technology or claim fault in tracking apps, the power dynamic is reversed, as they make the parents believe that they're incapable and that the child holds the knowledge and power in the relationship. Two adults, on the other hand, whether partners, friends, or family, can choose to track one another for safety purposes. It will not always disturb the relationship like it will between parents and teens or kids. Since all involved would be tracking one another, often no power dynamic or perhaps a less direct one, unless in the case of an unhealthy relationship where like one partner is in complete control, which would more resemble the prisoner security guard situation. However, when two close adults with a relationship built on trust and track one another, boundaries remain consistent, and power dynamics do not become a problem. When any suspicion or distrust arises, though, these technologies can amplify it, and any new information about a loved one's whereabouts or activity might seem to prove a suspicion that they're being disingenuous. Now, solutions. The first solution is specific to Entryway security cameras, and it is to outsource who receives the data from the cameras. So it would be using facial recognition technology or fingerprint scanning of the people who live in the house. They've already been identified, and anyone who comes in with them is not a security risk, so no one is notified. But if someone who is not in the registry comes in alone, that's when a parent or someone who lives in the house is then notified. Now, there are drawbacks to this. Security concerns involving untrustworthy companies are likely to happen, so people will feel uncomfortable offering information to these companies and will prefer to do the at home and keep the information to themselves. Also, I think the main one, facial recognition software is absolutely not foolproof, and errors are very likely to occur, as we've seen over and over with testing of facial recognition softwares and facial recognition zones in New York and highly populated areas. It does not work a lot of the time. And it is also easy to bypass in the same way that the other cameras and safety concerns were easy to bypass. The more likely solution here is to only use security and to only use tracking in emergencies, and to make sure that boundaries are respected. The option to revoke the technology must be present at any time for any reason by anyone, And the rights of the person being tracked must be guaranteed, especially if they're a child or a teen, because they cannot truly consent. This solution was first proposed by Kathleen Gabriels in her moral critique of tracking apps, and I really do believe it is the likeliest one. It is applicable to most technologies and does not have almost any safety concerns. And by establishing boundaries, it supports healthy relationships in the present and the future. And there are not nearly as many drawbacks, but a lot of trust is required, and the parent will still be in control, even if all decisions are done democratically. But overall, this is important because as the Internet of Things expands, how people handle the ability to track one another now will absolutely set the precedent for even more intrusive technologies into the future. Any questions?
Yeah, I do have two questions for you. Sorry, I'm having tech issues on my end. It's actually user issue. It's not a tech issue. Mm-hmm. How valid and reliable were the sources that you used, and then how do you know?
My sources were very reliable. I made sure that all of them were peer reviewed. Most of them were studies and journals done by universities or companies, like I had one done from Google, and they were actually, a lot of them were presented at a conference called Unicomp, which is a conference about intrusive technologies. The only one that was not peer reviewed in my entire report and this presentation was the stimulus source. It was from the New York Times by Brian Chen. But since that is an internet company, and since he is someone who's very involved in the Internet of Things as someone who works in his field, I believe that he is also qualified to speak on this.
Okay, and if you had any advice to give to someone who would be doing something on this in the future, what would you say to them?
Like I brought up Unicomp before, I just so happened to find out that most of my sources had presented there. And whenever you go to their website, there's a very clear list of sources and that you can use because they were all good enough to have presented at this very niche topic. And I would also, so I had trouble finding any sources on the psychology because there's not a lot into the future. Since this is such a new thing, there's not a lot of evidence of the effects of the tracking on teens as they continue to grow up. And so I recommend either conducting a study or finding someone who is conducting a study, looking at the long-term effects, because I do think that those will be very important.